Hey there, it's Liz Gracia, and welcome to another episode of your weekly dose of higher consciousness that you can find on my YouTube channel at trumpeteroftruth.tv.com or my podcast at trumpeteroftruthradio.com. This is the place to discover the foundational basics and essential understandings for raising your level of consciousness and building a better life. And today's episode is sponsored by the Mind, Body, Spirit Network, which is an online community of conscious curators of transformational online events, alternative and holistic online courses, expert blog posts, and service professionals, all in the realm of mind, body, and spirit. And last week, I let everyone know that I'm breaking up our weekly dose into 3 different videos so that you can go straight to what you want to look at. This is the video which covers today's topic, which is I'm going to tell the story of a quantum spiritual awakening and help you to understand what's a spiritual awakening in general, never mind a quantum one, and what to look for. What are the signs and symptoms, and what did I notice about it? But before we get started on that, I want to introduce the next 2 videos that you can choose to watch or not. I always love to introduce your weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz right at the beginning of this so that you can go find the answers on the other video. And just, it's kind of fun to see if you can guess or feel your way into higher levels of consciousness. So this week's quiz is all about movies. Which movie is of highest consciousness? And this is the content of the movie, not the value of the production or the actors or anything. It's the collective consciousness of the content. So the first movie is Sleepless in Seattle with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. The second one is Ghostbusters with our gang of Bill Murray and his funny gang of Ghostbusters. And the other one is the famous Sound of Music with Julia Andrews. So the answer to that will be in another video that you'll see right after this one if you decide to go there, or you can just find my playlist that has all your quizzes in it. And then the third video that you can see after this is my 101 Ways to Success. And that's taken from Dr. Hawkins' book, his book of slides. And every week I like to share 101 Ways to Success, 101 Ways to Happiness, and 101 Ways to Peace. So those are mixed up every week. So you just get little tidbits of understanding, levels of consciousness as it relates to happiness, peace, and success. So this week, I want to share my story of what I could only call a quantum spiritual awakening, which led me to where I am today. And in 2003, I had what only could be called a quantum spiritual awakening. But how it began was I lived in Boston up until 2002, and I had my own business in the Back Bay of Boston called Sweet Pea's Home. You may or may not, if you're from the Boston area, you may or may not remember that. But I decided to close up the shop and move cross-country to Colorado with my then husband at the time. We both had met in Park City, Utah, which is a mountain resort and ski area, and we really love the mountains, and we decided, we don't necessarily, where should we go where we can have an active lifestyle, ski, and, have good work opportunities? So we decided on the Boulder, Colorado area. So we moved to Boulder in the fall of 2002. In January of 2003, my husband came home and said to me, I'm done with the marriage. I was like, holy crap. What the F am I going to do? And at the time when he said it to me, the energy of truth washed over me, where I understood there was no begging and pleading and asking for forgiveness or anything. He was done. And then I went into months of grief and loss and crying and all of this ridiculous emotion, which in hindsight, I look at it as ridiculous emotion, but I could not stop the grief and the sorrow and the loss of it all. And I was stuck in this attractor field, essentially, of lower consciousness, which is really my mind bringing up everything, all these fears I have about supporting myself, being on my own, beliefs I have about a marriage, beliefs I have about divorce, all of this, blame and shame and whatever that comes up during these types of situations. And, I've done a little bit of research online about, what can trigger a spiritual awakening. And so many things can trigger a spiritual awakening. And I don't know that it necessarily has to be driven by loss, grief and loss and tragedy, job loss, marriage loss, death of somebody. I don't know that it has to be that to trigger a spiritual awakening, where you could just come into a spiritual awakening without not even trying. You could come into an awakening that's like an aha moment that shifts your life in a new direction. It could be just meeting somebody that moves you in a new direction. So a spiritual awakening, from my perspective, I had a quantum one, and let's put it into context. Dr. Hawkins talks about major life events. What does it take to have a major life event shift you, life-changing event is what he's calling it. What does it take to shift you into a new direction? And based on the map of consciousness, most of us only raise our level of consciousness maybe 5 points on the map. And if you understand the map, if you've seen some of my other videos, I have some foundational videos to help you understand the map of consciousness, first of all, understanding the lower levels and the higher levels. So based on consciousness research, it could take a half a point on the map for something to be a major life event, to shift you in another direction. And it depends on where you are collectively on the map of consciousness. The higher you are, a half a point is huge because the map is logarithmic. If you're on the high, it doesn't matter where you are on the map because of that logarithmic nature of it, is quantum in nature. And the higher you go, the more significant that leap is, even half a point. So when I had the quantum spiritual awakening, let's back up and tell you what led to how things change. So I stayed with my husband. We didn't barely speak to each other for 3 months because I was crying the whole time and he was working. And I just had to figure out, what is my next move going to be? And I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time. I didn't have any friends. I just moved there. Didn't get a job, and I hadn't really integrated. So all the crap I was telling myself made it even worse. Like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I shut down my business of 12 years. I left out my family and friends, and here I am alone in Boulder, Colorado. And boohoo, I was having a pity party for 3 months, literally crying day and night. And I'm like, how the hell did I do that for so long? And I didn't want to share anything with my family about what was going on because of the shame of it all. You brought up Catholic, there's shame in divorce, whether you believe it or not. It's still in your system, and it comes up for you to deal with. So one of my friends owns several businesses on Nantucket Island, just off of Cape Cod. And I, by the way, used to have a restaurant on Nantucket as well called the Morning Glory Cafe. But she had to go and open her businesses. And I finally confided in her and said, this is what's going on. She's like, Liz, come help me open my businesses. Because on Nantucket, it's seasonal. So you got to, stock up the stores, clean up the stores. She had 3 or 4 stores at the time, train everybody. There was more than enough work to keep me occupied. So to add insult to injury, we get to Nantucket. And if you've ever been to Nantucket in the spring, it's friggin' miserable usually. This particular spring, we were inundated with non-stop torrential rain. This is one reason why they call Nantucket the Gray Lady. Everything is gray, dismal. If you have problems with depression, this ain't the place to live in the spring, that's for sure. So while I'm doing all this work to help her get ready, I continue with the crying and the despair. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? Blah, blah, blah. So one day the sun finally came out. And I felt serious happiness come upon me. So if you look at the map, grief and loss is like 100 or 75 on the map of consciousness, super low. It's a low magnetic attractor field. But then one day I stepped into happiness and relief, which is feeling good is above 200, feeling glad is 335. I was feeling pretty happy, which is 395 on the map. In any event, wherever I was at, it was a quantum leap above grief and loss. It's like it just left me. And this is when I started to feel the awakening. And as the summer progressed, or like those first couple of weeks progressed, I met people, in particular, a gentleman. And I had gotten over grief and loss, but I hadn't gotten over ending my marriage. So I still was living with this. I have no interest in men at all, no interest in dating at all. But I end up walking into a restaurant one day that's packed with people. And the bar, which I love to sit at, was packed with people except for one spot between two guys. And I'm like, oh, crap. I have no interest in talking to anybody. But I've decided, just go for it, because I was feeling better. And I ended up talking to this gentleman next to me, which turned out to be what is known as a twin flame, which I don't know how much I believe about that, but I have reason to believe it was a significant relationship for me to have connected. This is kind of like someone comes along of a consciousness level or a soul contract, whatever the heck you want to call it, who knows, but he shifted me in another direction in a big way. And after that meeting, we communicated with each other a little bit for a couple of weeks, and then there was no communication, and then we saw each other on occasion, nothing major. But I shifted into what I came to understand as in the 500s, which is connecting with inner joy at 540, unconditional love, lovingness, something I did not recognize. It was a quantum leap, and it is a quantum leap to jump into the 500s from grief and loss, for sure, or my normal consciousness, which I tried to figure out or calibrate, may have been in the mid 300s. I don't know, before this happened. But then I had someone help calibrate what happened after this event, and it was into the 500s I was operating at for a while. So this is a quantum leap, massive spiritual awakening, which I don't necessarily recommend. I definitely don't recommend forcing it because of what's going on in consciousness. So let's just talk about a basic spiritual awakening. Can be anything that awakens you into the light of day on a particular subject and moves you in another direction. You're like, oh, it's an aha moment, which is enough to move you in another direction that's positive aspect oriented. This is an awakening, positive aspect oriented. But what happened to me and can happen to others is this giant leap into very high levels of consciousness. This is not half a point. This is more like 200, 300, 400 points on the map of consciousness. I've been in the presence of 850 on the map, which is huge. Can be problematic if you don't have the foundation underneath you to support that leap. And this you may be familiar with. You go into this, there's this pendulum swing. And at this level, it is horrific. And Dr. Hawkins has spoken about it as well in other words, but he's kind of describing the same thing. I did not have the foundational basics to be in this level of consciousness because I got lower stuff running on within me that I'm not even aware of because I've buried it. So what happens is you go into these highs and lows and you're looking manic depressive in the eyes of a mental health professional. So in the eyes of a mental health professional, you look manic depressive. I was aware that I was swinging into these different spiritual dimensions. I knew it was a spiritual thing. I knew it wasn't a mental health thing. I was aware of it. I was aware of my behavior and what it looked like. And these swings just getting more and more intense. So, and when you get into these higher levels, like I did, you can come into what's called a spiritual emergency. And that's a whole other topic I'm not going to talk about right now. But if you're experiencing swings, you come into an awakening, but then you're swinging back. What that's telling you is that you've got unresolved stuff that needs to come up, be released, because those unresolved things down here provide no foundation. It's like sand, a house built on sand at high tide. It's always moving around. You have no firm footing. In order to have firm footing, you got to let go of this lower stuff, which I didn't know at the time. It took me years to figure it out and get the help I needed, which is how Dr. Hawkins came into my life, the teachings of Dr. Hawkins, who is, by the way, of extremely high consciousness. And according to consciousness calibrations, which he never did on himself, and he wouldn't recommend it that you try to do it on yourself at all, because the ego gets involved. But he is of the highest level of consciousness, like Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. And if you lack awareness of his teachings, you would easily poo-poo them, like you could dismiss them, because we have this belief that anyone of this higher consciousness is out of our reach. It's not true. There have been what's called avatars throughout history, always present on this planet, whether you're aware of them or not. Some just happen to be more famous than others. Dr. Hawkins, if you want to listen, understand what the teachings of the Buddha or the Christ, highly recommend you go to listen to Dr. Hawkins on YouTube. There's plenty of teachings that you can listen to that have been shared all over YouTube. It's huge. If you're going in a spiritual awakening right now, just the energy of what he speaks can help you smooth out the edges. But you got to learn to let go of the lower, because if you're getting high on something and you're still holding on to the lower, it's gonna present itself in some way or another. This is what spiritual awakening is without awareness. These swings in consciousness is what's happening. You're going from the higher to the lower. Now, what really gave me an aha moment was this lecture I saw that Dr. Hawkins did about, it was in regards to Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is where I realized, oh, this is what's happening in consciousness. In alcoholics, they swing into these high levels, artificially created levels. And they're not the truth. They hold no spiritual truth that alcohol creates higher consciousness for you. It's not true, essentially. And that lecture is not available on YouTube anymore. So I'm pretty sure you have to buy it at veritas.pub and email them and say, hey, can I buy the lecture on Alcoholics Anonymous? It's of higher consciousness and understanding. So it could be a hard understanding if you don't get it. You don't understand the map yet. But I got it in regards to what was going on with me. So when you get into super high levels of consciousness, you're powerful whether you know it or not. And you know you're powerful because you're getting stuff you're not consciously asking for, which is where that statement is. Be careful what you wish for, because you can create it by holding it in mind. So when I was operating these super high levels of consciousness, I was holding fear in mind because I didn't know what the hell was going on. I knew I was in the presence of divinity, angelic realms, higher consciousness, God, if you will, whatever you want to call it. And I had fear about it. And the fear that shows up is unworthy. Like I felt unworthy of being in the presence of divinity, for sure. So that energy, that belief is going to throw you back good and hard, seemingly, because this powerful creator, this powerful belief is like, okay, well, go see what that feels like. It's a swing. And that, I promise you, at those levels is horrific to do that and to go through that. So other things I've noticed in a quantum spiritual awakening, it could be in a less quantum awakening, is that you awaken into intuitive kind of gifts, or clairvoyance is the ability to see in your third eye. This really awakened for me quickly after I met this gentleman. Like, I got the message that our coming together was of significance in a spiritual realm. Of course, I took it literally to mean in a relationship, which would be old patterns coming up. But I also knew that I also knew to stay at bay from him because I had greater awareness of the level of love at a spirit level between us than he did. So I knew to an extent not to share that with him because I'd appear loony. At least I had the wherewithal to understand that. So clairvoyance is the ability to see with your eyes closed. And typically I get messages coming out of sleep. Like I'll be lying, I can ask a question, and the ability to see a message can come. With me, all avenues opened up. So clairvoyance is one of them, the ability to see. Clairaudience is the ability to hear non-physical conversations like spirit talking to me, spiritual guides or friends or angels talking to me like as if they're standing right here having a conversation. Clairsentience is the ability to feel information, which is huge. I felt information, which I'm going to share. I think next week's topic is about how the book Conversations with God came to me during a crisis, and I'd never heard of the book. I'm going to talk to you about that. So clairsentience is feeling information. Claircognizance is just knowing. You don't know how you know, you just do. And the truth is like right there. Just like when my husband came home that day from 3 weeks work in Europe, he came home, he said he was done. The truth of that came into me like, you're done. I'm like, oh crap. So I had to, I'm trying to keep my head above water emotionally, and I couldn't, I like showed me how weak my foundation was and the belief I had about myself. So this is a sign of a spiritual awakening, is you could open up into these gifts. I don't want you to be afraid of them. Welcome them and understand that you got to learn to fine tune them and trust. Some you'll trust, some you won't trust. If you have a quantum awakening, you got a lot of crap coming in too. Some that's true, some that's not. Another important thing to understand is that you are surrounded by spiritual guidance, the angelic realm, if that's kind of your nature. I felt the presence of angels for sure. I didn't know why, but I'm glad in hindsight, thank God they were there because I needed their help. And Dr. Hawkins does a lecture, which I think you can find on YouTube, where he tests the truth of the presence of guardian angels. Like we all have them, spirit guides, guardian angels. He tested that we do, calibrates as true. So if you're getting into uncharted territory like I was, know that there is higher, the angelic realm calibrates at 540 and above, I think. Super high levels of unconditional love and joy. It's good to have them around you. Same with spirit guides. Typically, they're going to be of higher consciousness than you are. Just make sure you know who you're talking to best you can. You just got to feel your way through it. Always turn to God for sure. Jesus and the Buddha. Hello, my best friends. Call in Jesus. Like I've gone on what's known as I didn't know that it was this. It's called a shamanic journey. I didn't know what it was until I met Sandra Ingerman, who teaches all about it, and she describes it. I'm like, holy crap, that's what happened to me. I went on a shamanic journey with Jesus, which was kind of like just matter of fact. I'm like, dude, what are you doing here? He was dressed up in like a Carhartt suit, and he was showing me something, showing me that my life has 4 possible paths it can take right now. I went on this shamanic journey with him while I was driving the car with my dad. I don't know how that happened, but it just did. So important things to know about quantum spiritual awakenings, which is not to say that it could be a simple half a point, is quantum in nature. But if you get into this swing, you got to come into a grounded state and understanding that there's lower levels of consciousness you got to let go of. And you've got to step into courage on all of it. Because if you go into fear, there's no support, the energy, there's no gas in the tank to support you during a spiritual awakening if you're in fear. You got to step into courage on it, and acceptance and willingness to kind of play with the energy of it, so to speak. You got to look out for if you become psychic and clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, entirely intuitive. Don't be afraid of it. It's natural. It's part of the process. You're stepping into higher awareness at a particular level. And according to some of the people I've interviewed and some of the courses that are available through the Mind, Body, Spirit Network, each of the chakras holds is like a stronghold for one of those. And I forget which is which. Like, you know, clairvoyance is third eye, so it must be the third eye chakra, presumably. The heart might be clairsentience or intuitive knowing, something like that. I'm not sure on that. You'd have to check out with the course experts on that. So it can be scary. Another sign of a quantum spiritual awakening for me. So when you get up into the 500s, and Dr. Hawkins talks about this, especially like into 540, synchronicity can come super fast. And for me, it was so fast and so on point throughout the day, it was almost frightening because I didn't know what was going on. So I want to assure you there's nothing to be afraid of, but it can be disturbing because I could be thinking a thought and the answer to my question is being spoken by someone else in the back of a store, as an example. This is what happened. I'd be thinking a thought, the answer of it would be spoken in the back of the store, and then someone else would kind of, the whole thing was coming together all at once. It was a little disturbing at the time to have it that rapid fire. I couldn't speak without, you know, and here's another example. I was watching Friends a lot because it's lighthearted and fun. I loved that at the time. This was in 2003. So Friends was just wrapping up its decade, I think. And I'd watch Friends and these swings would come. I'd come into like this high level of consciousness in the evening. And while I'm watching Friends, I could speak what was coming out of their mouths before they even said it. That was scary. Like I knew what the next line was before it happened. So this is what's happening at higher levels. You're coming into greater awareness of the present moment, so to speak. But then also at those high levels, the darkness came immediately after it. So there was these other swings into darkness, which this is more of a spiritual emergency conversation about swings into darkness, but I'll at least give you a heads up. When you get this super high, intuitively I knew or felt like I could be a threat to someone. So this is on the quantum spiritual awakening end. I felt like I could be a threat to someone. Little did I know the threat was not on the physical level, like Jesus Christ as an example. He got killed by his persecutors, right? It was physical. Although he did talk about, there's a story about, 40 days and 40 nights of darkness. That's kind of what I experienced, is the non-physical confrontation with what could only be known as incredible, horrific darkness or evil, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to give it too much of a name, but the energies of that are horrific and intense. So to go from the super high level to confrontations with the low, this leads to a spiritual emergency, which I had. We're not going to talk about that now. We're talking about basic spiritual awakenings, is life telling you it's time to wake up. Step into higher consciousness on whatever topic it is. It could be just stepping into a higher consciousness about yourself. I think all of it is, in one way or another. Relationships help you. Divorces are super great, teachers for relationships and understanding, stepping into higher consciousness on a relationship. If you get into divorce, there's all kinds of beliefs that come up. And for women, there could be security issues that come up that aren't necessarily your own. They're of mass consciousness, that you can't take care of yourself. All these beliefs, and this is what was coming up in me. How am I going to take care of myself? I'm never going to get married again. I'm not good enough. All this crap that I didn't consciously believe, but I felt it within me. So spiritual awakenings are opportunities to let go of what's showing up in your lower, buried in your unconscious. And they'll come to the surface if you're willing to step into higher consciousness on anything. Life knows, like, okay, if you're willing to do this, I'm going to show you what's in the way of that. So life will always present itself. If your intention is to be of higher consciousness and raise your level of consciousness, life is going to say, great, I'm on board with you. And you're your intention for this. However, stuff is going to show up that is not of higher consciousness to let you know what's still going on within you. And this is where, if you don't know any better, someone, could be someone in your family, friends, someone you don't even know, triggering anger, resentment, bitterness, judgmentalism, criticism, whatever. They're only showing you what's in your energy. This is what the mirror is about. I used to wonder, what the hell are you talking about? Everyone's a mirror. Now I get it. Everyone's a mirror in that they are a reflection of the vibration that's going on within you. If it's positive oriented or negatively oriented, either one, they're showing up to show you, you can point and blame me. You can point and blame someone else for being mean to you, but you're asking for it vibrationally. And the being meanness is your opportunity to step into your own power and defend yourself. Like, what do you can say, like, what are you talking to me like that for? Something like that. Every opportunity that, really pushes your button, you got to stop and say, okay, what is life trying to show me right now? Am I willing to let go of it? Because I'd love to step into higher consciousness on this and let it go. I highly recommend the How to Let Go episode and Dr. Hawkins. I don't have the book handy, but Letting Go, The Pathway to Surrender, teaches all about the mechanism of letting go. And I've had tremendous results in shifting into higher levels of consciousness in an easy way by letting go of things as they come up. And the more you let go, the easier it gets, because you're getting into higher levels of consciousness and higher power that can offset the negativity. It just keeps getting easier. So I don't recommend quantum spiritual awakenings, but guess what? I think they tend to sneak up on you so that you can deal with it. And you can earn what Dr. Hawkins calls karmic merit. You can't earn your karmic merit if you don't earn it energetically, which is not to say that you have to suffer, but the ego is a tough one. The ego is a magnetically attractive, downward pulling thing that can be difficult to break through, but that's the opportunity. The opportunity to earn karmic merit is to understand levels of consciousness. Is super helpful to understand where you're at. And understanding what spiritual awakenings are opportunities, and they all have, there's silver linings to all of them, unless you're going to remain in victimhood about it. Anything below 200 on the map of consciousness is the land of victimhood. Take it from me. I spent a lot of time there for years. And you can spend a lot of time in victimhood on any topic. So best to let go of all forms of victimhood if you want to raise your level of consciousness at all. So I hope this was helpful in understanding what a spiritual awakening is. Why do they come to you? They come to you to help wake you up to what's going on in your life, especially if you're asking for more. If you're asking for more, the blocks to it are going to show up. And you just got to be aware, like, okay, I see it now. You got to see it. And when you're in the land of victimhood, the veil is there for sure until you see it. And if you're asking to see it, you will eventually see it. So there's some key tips on spiritual awakening. I have a tremendous story to share about my quantum one. We're not going to go into that today, but we'll talk about spiritual emergencies maybe next month. We'll take it a little at a time. Likely a spiritual emergency is going to happen and you're going to be in the midst of it before you know what it is, which happened to me. But maybe the more of us that understand it, the less of us have to go through the tremendous suffering that can be beyond this. It's the dark night of the soul for sure, but I think mine was beyond dark night of the soul. This was not a little bout of depression. This was way more than that at a quantum level. Thank you for joining me today on this week's weekly dose of higher consciousness. I hope you found it helpful, all about spiritual awakenings. Oh, there's my dog Charlie barking. I'll get to him in a second. I'm going to finish up with you guys. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below wherever you're watching or listening to this. And I'm happy to create other topics, other episodes on topics that are of interest to you. Signing out, this is Liz Gracia, your happy host of Trumpeter of Truth Radio.com and Trumpeter of Truth TV.com. See you next week, where I'm going to talk about how the book Conversations with God came to me. See you then.